Have you heard of the Lavender Scare? It's often referenced as one of the earliest queer historical uses of lavender. This isn't really true though. What's known as the Lavender Scare began in 1950. At the time, there was a fear of communist infiltration into the US government, the idea that members of staff were leaking information to Russia. This was the early days of the Cold War. Loads of people were fired from their jobs, often for having any sort of left-wing politics because of this fear. This is known as the Red Scare. But queer people of all kinds were also being persecuted. Throughout the 1950s and into the 60s, over 1,000 people were fired from US government jobs because they were thought to be homosexual. It was all just an excuse for homophobia. But how does lavender come into this? The Lavender Scare was only named the Lavender Scare in 2004, when historian David K. Johnson wrote a book about this period of history titled The Lavender Scare, The Cold War Persecution of Gays and Lesbians in the Federal Government. By this point, lavender had a huge queer history, largely in LGBTQ activism. But Johnson based the label on a phrase that had been used by Republican Senator Everett Dirksen in 1952, who called queer staff members of the State Department the Lavender Lads. Lavender and purple more broadly appear time and time again in queer history, but the label Lavender Scare is an ode to that history rather than evidence of it. You can find out more about purple in queer history as well as in lesbian fashion in my book Unsuitable, A History of Lesbian Fashion.